the Zelda series. So many of us love and live for these games. And for years fans have theorized about timelines and the likes of that, until Nintendo finally gave us an answer in the form of Hyrule Historia. But then Breath of the Wild came out and things became a bit tricky. Us fans could still make the lore work with theories, me included with my fourth timeline theory, but then BAM! Tears of the Kingdom. And now, quite frankly, I think most of us are confused. People work hard to make their own theories and somehow fit it into existing lore, me included, but it's really not that easy. This makes one wonder, could these games be part of a soft Zelda reboot? And would that even be a good thing? Can it work? Before we dive into that, hello my lovelies, welcome to my channel! I decided to try and branch out a bit, somewhat. I mean, this technically is also still a Zelda theory, but I'm not trying to implement new theorized lore into existing lore here. I'm in fact not even trying to tell you whether we do have an actual reboot or soft reboot or not, because quite frankly, at this point no one but Nintendo knows. No, I want to look at the whole idea of a reboot itself and how it would work with Zelda. If it works with Zelda and if this is a good thing or not. And of course, why it might be done at all. An analysis, or maybe even a discussion if you will. Of course, I do give my own take on it, but I'm also going to look at reboots in general and how they affected other series to try and build a bit of an objective take. Emphasis on try. So, I know the opinions on a Zelda reboot are quite mixed. There is a bit of a spectrum. Many hate it, some think it's fine, or don't care, and some think it's a great idea. I'll give my own opinion closer towards the end, but for now I just wanted to bring this up because there are reasons why people don't like the idea, and I'd say valid reasons. There were years spent in building this intricate and complex, and dare I say sometimes kind of messy lore. And it became very important to a lot of people. And to say all of this is suddenly gone and no longer accurate can be quite hurtful to a fan's heart. But would that even be the case? That everything is no longer valid or accurate? I mean, the Link's Awakening remake was released after Breath of the Wild came out, so what would that tell you? That there would still be an interest in going back, no? But how about we begin looking into how other series have handled it? For this section I'm going to look at unsuccessful reboots, mixed reboots and of course successful reboots, using examples of other series for each category. Some in more, some in less detail. After that, I'm going to put Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom into one of these categories. This is of course if we theorize that these games represent a reboot. This whole thing is part of a discussion and I think it's good to have a base to compare it to. So now, it's time to start with the unsuccessful reboots. SimCity 2013. So, this is a bit of a tricky reboot to compare to, because this is a city builder game and all about strategy and planning. Like, did it really have to be called a reboot if the games don't have a set story and timeline throughout? Well, I decided to include it in this list either way because the reasons for why this reboot failed could ruin any potential reboot. SimCity 4 is one of my favorite games, but I did skip this newer one for the reasons that I'm gonna talk about, and those start with the fact that EA hyped this game up to the extreme, and the launch was so disastrous that it killed the franchise. You see, While multiplayer and online mode were pushed as these new amazing features, it turned out that the game forced you to have to be online even if you play solo. Of course, there were also limitations to city sizes and several bugs, which all in all made the game frustrating to play. And even after forced online mode was finally removed, there was no way to gain back trust, because EA misunderstood what the fans of this franchise wanted. People didn't want to build cities with others like some co-op games. They wanted to do their own thing, without limits, and to watch as it grows. There are more points, but this is supposed to be a Zelda video, so I don't want to spend too much time on this. I did want to add another example here, but the truth is, I think there aren't that many reboots worth mentioning as a failure, because a lot of them seem to fail due to technical issues and still find their own loyal fan base. Instead, the situation seems more nuanced. I promise you, we will cycle back to Zelda and it will make sense. It's a journey. So I'm moving on to mixed reboots, ones that were received well in some ways and not well in others. I'll start with DMC, Devil May Cry, and as if having a name that basically says Devil May Cry, Devil May Cry isn't odd enough, let me run through the basics real quick. Changing up characters and their writing in a drastic way when the series was literally at its peak before that, trying to grab a wider audience which wouldn't really have been open for this kind of game to begin with. I like the series, and I felt this game might have done better as its own title rather than a Devil May Cry game, because technically speaking it had a lot of great features. Gameplay and design wise, just wasn't necessary. I'd say it is another case of misunderstanding your player base. I mean, no one asked for this, and it is no wonder that after that the series returned to the original lore, with Devil May Cry 5 totally voiding the reboot. That brings me to another reboot with mixed effects. I live for this series, well, I live for a bunch of series, but Tomb Raider. This series got rebooted twice, with varying effects, but still successful sales. First, the title character Lara Croft was a nice British lady who would shoot you and explore tombs for fun. In the first reboot, she still seemed like someone who enjoyed exploring, but all adventures were about old unsolved family drama. And in the second reboot, they changed her up a lot. It was all about her father, less about an own interest in exploration. Gameplay, difficulty and combat focus also have big changes here, but I think the character change is what weighs the most heavy. I know classic Lara Croft was quite sexualized by the media, but in-game it didn't come off that way so much. She was confident, always had a cool response to things, but could also have her awkward moments. The first reboot kept somewhat true to it, but in the second reboot strayed so far that the character is hardly recognizable as herself. Lara Croft was a big part of the series' identity, and now where it seems that she has lost her identity, it seems to be the same case for the games too, even if they were enjoyable from a gameplay standpoint. And this brings us to the third category, successful reboots. I promise you, this won't be too long and we'll get back to Zelda soon. So here we have Doom 2016. I never played the series, but I do know just how iconic it is. And going off of what I researched, this reboot was successful because it went back to its roots. You had open-ended levels and faster gameplay. The idea behind this reboot seemed to be more like what the original Doom of 1993 might have been like if it was released today. Oh well, in 2016. This reboot was so successful that it really revived the series and created a sequel with Doom Eternal in 2020. And finally, before we get back into Zeldaing, one final example. Star Fox 64. a reboot of the original Super Nintendo title. You had detailed characters with full voiceovers, improved gameplay and several modes to enjoy. Although this reboot rebooted a young franchise at the time, it was so incredibly successful until many still holds up today. So here we have a case of the original being taken and improved in plenty of ways. Though the series was rebooted again with Star Fox Zero, it couldn't reach the same acclaim as 64. Of course, this is also a bit of a tricky reboot in name, because couldn't it be counted as a remake as well? A lot of games out there are listed as reboots in like top 10 lists and such, but are not actually officially named as such. Funnily enough, even Breath of the Wild shows up as a popular reboot when, is it? Is it not? As said, I'm not the one who has the final answer to that. I think this shows what can make or break a reboot. You see, I think some successful reboots were successful because they have gone back to the series' roots. Some were because they kept the base but expanded on it beautifully. Some were successful in one aspect but failed in another, because they didn't understand what fans wanted. And sometimes this misunderstanding of the core values of a game led to a failed reboot. So where would I place a new Era of Zelda if it was to represent a reboot? You might not be surprised to find out that I would consider these games to be successful reboots, of course. But what could surprise you is that I think this position still is a tiny bit critical. Critical as in you could probably argue to put them closer towards the mixed category if you wanted to. But again, I do think this is quite a nuanced and subjective situation, so I'm going to tell you why I think the games deserve this spot. I'll try to be more objective for this one, based off of what I just talked about with the other reboots, and then I will give my own take later on. So, why it would be a good reboot begins with the fact that the series has, despite what many fans seem to think, gone back to its roots. And no, the Zelda formula we have seen across most games is not the formula that the series fully began with. Breath of the Wild took direct inspiration from Zelda 1, the very first game, which was more open world and gave you more choice than most of the games that came after it. You were dropped into this open world without much guidance and could find your own way, which might be different on each playthrough. This is the same case in the new games, somewhat. You still have both new games telling you which areas are important and you get lots of markers, but how you go about it is still up to you. Zelda 1 did not directly have it so much in-game, but instead you had a manual that came with the game, which would point you into the right direction. Of course, game manuals played a whole different role for gaming back then than they do now, because the games couldn't show you as much due to limitations. A lot of lore and guidance was hidden in them. That being said, in both games exploration is still the focal point. There are more similarities, but this is the greatest parallel, I'd say. Next up, we have the main theme of Zelda games still alive and well. By that I mean the coming of age theme. We have these teens and young adults who are met with a greater threat to the world. They are forced to mature fast and face incredibly difficult choices that add to this whole process. And what is interesting about that in Breath of the Wild is that this is shown in much more detail with both Link and Zelda. We actually get to find out about their struggles, dealing with having to fulfill these massive duties, how Link remains quiet and cold because of being overwhelmed by his role as a hero, and Zelda is shown to be so stressed about her powers that she even snaps at Link. The theme is there in pretty much all the games, and here it comes out very nicely too. And in Tears of the Kingdom we really do have more mature versions of them, who are still faced with even more maturing. So the theme remains alive. And that brings me to the point of self-reference, common in any Zelda game, and it's no different here. Both games reuse plenty of themes from previous games, though they are sometimes applied in different ways. But if we look at Tears of the Kingdom, it is even more clear. Temples, sages, secret stones, time travel. Things that several Zelda games include, but apply to the open world structure. I'd also say that these are some of the best characterizations of the main characters. Ganon not so much, since he can't really compete with Wind Waker Ganon, but Link and Zelda? Definitely. As mentioned, we know of their struggles, but Link is still kept somewhat distant to not take away from the silent protagonist and connection to the player aspect. But Zelda? She is so fleshed out, she has layers to her characters that make her feel more real even. The things she goes through, while fantastical, are still shown to affect her and how she acts. Then of course we have new things in those games that really add to the experience. The whole open world in itself is a great addition. You can climb almost everything. Very little really seems off limits. Many games limit you with silly invisible walls where you know you could easily step over. What is also fun here is that places are not separated by transitions. If you see a town in the distance, you can go to it without the loading screen, without the screen fading out first. It's all quite smooth and, as said, really encourages you to explore. And it gives you so much choice. So much, in fact, that I felt overwhelmed at first. But then it became one of the best things about it. Your playthrough will always be different than the previous one. It is up to you how much you do and when and in which way. But we do have to look at the other side. Things that might actually not be such a good sign. One aspect of these games that was always highly debated was the breaking of weapons. A new feature, but not just that. You see, part of the classic Zelda formula was the existence of large and intricate dungeons, often in shape of temples. We have the Divine Beast in Breath of the Wild and the temples in Tears of the Kingdom, but they don't come close to what the dungeons used to be. That really was an integral part of Zelda that is no longer present. Then there is the story. I do think these games really live through environmental storytelling, but what led people to see them as a reboot in the first place is the way the story appears compared to the overarching story of the Zelda universe. With Breath of the Wild, it was still possible to figure out how things fit into the timeline. The most common theory seemed to be it was on the Downfall timeline, where, as I theorized, the fourth timeline, as you can see on my channel. But with Tears of the Kingdom, it feels quite disconnected, not just from the previously established universe, but also somewhat from its own prequel, Breath of the Wild. Events of that game are mentioned in passing, but I suppose it is kind of hard to make an open world sequel to another open world game, where you have so much choice in how much story you actually play through. So all in all, I still think the positives strongly outweigh the negatives, and that is why, objectively, I would consider Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom to be successful reboots, if Nintendo decides to officially consider them as such, of course. But as mentioned, this position can be quite critical, and one could find arguments to put it closer to the mixed reboots category. And why? Well, first of all, was a reboot necessary? That is a question people wonder about, especially in regard to the old Zelda formula. To many people, the thought of missing it now is absolutely horrible, and understandably, as the series is one many people, including myself, grew up with. Then, of course, the games have it so the story tries to connect to pre-existing lore in some ways, but then totally contradicts it in others. Ocarina of Time was supposedly the first appearance of Ganondorf. According to Tears of the Kingdom, he emerged way before that. The existence of Rito and Zora in these ancient times too. Again, with Breath of the Wild we really didn't have those issues, but Tears of the Kingdom references such an ancient past that seems to contradict the way we have seen it before, which is what makes a lot of people believe in a reboot anyway. Sure, you can find explanations for everything. I mean, I make Zelda theories, so that's sort of my job too, to try and piece things together. But it does make you wonder, is this sort of confusion a good thing? And this is where my more subjective take comes in. Just know that a lot of what comes now boils down to my own opinion, and you are free to disagree. I do not want you to feel like I want to force my opinion onto you. So, first of all, I love Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom even more. I'd even call Tears of the Kingdom one of my most favorite games and potentially my favorite Zelda game. At the moment, at least. That could change over time, but I think it's healthy to be able to see things that you love in a critical light. And while I would say that as a reboot, these games would be successful and great reboots, without a doubt, I do think there are some things that I can criticize. Because yes, I do think this whole vagueness about a connection to previous entries is kind of, well, it feels quite messy to me. I feel to really connect to previous entries, it takes too much explaining to fix the things. And to be a super obvious and no doubt reboot, I also think the games try too hard to connect to the established lore. And I suppose this is close to becoming a general criticism of the game, but is it still a good thing if the story of a game leaves you with more questions and confusion? And before you say yes, it can be good, I don't mean the kind of confusion or questions you get from games that mean to give you those. Like, for example, I love Silent Hill, and that series really leaves you with a lot of questions. But that's the point of it, to make you think, to make you interpret things. And I know the Zelda series has done it a lot too, and I love that about it, but we always had a bit of a base that still made perfect sense, you know? But then in Tears, we miss so many things, even from Breath of the Wild, where it feels incomplete. Of course, as said, you can disagree on this. This confusion does fuel us people who like to theorize about Zelda after all. It makes me wonder why Nintendo does this. Why keep it vague? I mean, we did get information that said Breath of the Wild is set so long after any Zelda game that things have faded into legends and myths. But is it perhaps just a cop-out to not announce a reboot? Personally, I believe they don't want to burn their bridges. Leave open the past so they can go back to it any time. Well, it was said that this new style is the one they want to go with for future Zelda games. This does leave open the possibility of going back to the old style and old timeline. But the truth is, a reboot does not rule out going back to your roots. I mean, Devil May Cry went back to the previous storyline after rebooting. Tomb Raider, after rebooting twice, still likes to go back to the classics for spin-offs. So reboot doesn't have to mean all that you knew has to be thrown away. Finally, no matter if we call this a reboot or simply a strong change of direction, I have my own thoughts on why this happened. So I grew up with Zelda. I love the classic formula as much as many of you might do. But this series has been running for a long time. Maybe this is a hot take, but I feel that there are not that many series that have run with such incredible success for such a long time. There is a good amount, but really many do get to a point where they fall from grace, even if just temporarily. And I do not think we really have that with Zelda. Not in a notable way, at least. But I'm wondering if maybe this whole change had to happen to avoid a potential dip in success. Why? Well, the Zelda formula is great and it works very strongly through self-reference. Many Zelda games had quite similar structure to A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time. Twilight Princess to Ocarina of Time is probably the best example I can think of. So, my thought is, what if the famous Zelda formula was going to run stale? And I'm sure a lot of us could have played more games like that, but what if Nintendo was running out of ideas? Did we really want it to get to the point where they end up making a bad game with that formula? Or would we rather have a new direction that keeps the series alive and well? And I mean, the new direction made this series bigger than ever, so what does this tell us? So, all in all, I'd say on a subjective and objective level, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom represent a good reboot, if they are that. If they are not reboots, I'd say this represents a confusing era for Zelda. lore-wise, I mean. In that case, I wouldn't be surprised if we get a second Hyrule Historia that is basically another collection of fan theories turned canon-ish. But I still think it's very important to see things like Hyrule Historia with a bit of a critical eye due to contradictions and varying interpretations, but that's beyond the point. Whatever this new era of Zelda is, I think it is a great era. One that did not just reshape the series, but gaming in general. How many games try to emulate what modern Zelda did? And if you are a new Zelda fan, well, I think you arrived at a great time. But what about you? Do you think the series got soft rebooted? What reboots of other series did you like or dislike? I'd love to hear about it. For the next video, I will probably make a public vote between two topics. I'm going on vacation for a while, so I'll have plenty of time to gather thoughts for whatever you choose. But until then, I want to wish you a great day, week, year, lifetime, and I'll see you next time!